Welcome to Reasonable Discourse. I'm Terry Young, and this is Shawn McAvoy. And today we're going to address an issue that's been in the news quite recently, and that is the issue concerning gun control, especially after the incident at Sandy Hook, the tragic incident back in December. Shawn, how would you frame the discussion that's currently going on in America about gun control as a response to what happened?
How would I frame it? I would definitely say that this has gone into a very interesting direction, because when this initially happened, my first thought was the complexity of this particular case, not just gun control, but mental health issues. What gun control laws, for instance, could have possibly prevented it. And it was kind of interesting to me how it just funneled into a very traditional gun banning debate. On one side, the NRA with the absolute right to hold guns on the other. So it seems like the debate isn't actually any different than usual. We just have a new incident that is sparking us in the same old direction that we have.
Do you think this debate has been particularly helpful?
Not so far.
Yeah.
I mean, it did result in Obama giving a very rousing ending to his State of the Union, undoubtedly. But so far, it doesn't seem to me to be a particularly productive debate.
Okay. It seems like that we have on one side the NRA response, as you mentioned, is sort of, we have the absolute right to firearms without any sort of restrictions on that. From a historical standpoint, that is not exactly accurate as it pertains to any of our constitutional rights.
And that led to a question I wanted to ask
sure.
you. Speaking of the absolute right debate, because things have changed a lot since 2008. We had the Heller case before the Supreme Court, which was then modified by, what, McDonald in 2010?
McDonald, Chicago versus McDonald.
Curious if you could explain a little of that, since that's your strength.
Sure. The first real Supreme Court case that dealt with the right to bear arms actually was probably 1939, was U.S. versus Miller. And that case came on the heels of federal legislation in response to the rise of organized crime. It led to adding a tax to certain types of weapons like sawed-off shotguns and certain automatic weapons. And at that point, the Supreme Court said the Second Amendment allowed for restrictions on guns if it did not pertain to the types of weapons that militias would have, the original basis for the Second Amendment. And really, we did not have a lot of court decisions about that until 2008 in the Heller versus D.C. case, or D.C. versus Heller, where the Supreme Court ruled that D.C.'s prohibition on the right to own a handgun was unconstitutional, that it was a fundamental right. And then in the 2010 decision, Chicago versus McDonald, the Supreme Court said that that was, in fact, a fundamental right to bear arms, or to own arms for private protection, that not only applied in the D.C. case, but to every state. What it leaves unanswered, though, would be the types of restrictions that we've seen proposed recently concerning the assault weapons ban, the limitations on the size of a magazine, and then it didn't mention anything at all also about background checks and things along those lines. And the argument, I think, from the NRA is that all those things would be unconstitutional. Unfortunately, the Supreme Court cases that deal with that sort of leave those questions open. We don't really know, and we probably won't find out until there's more litigation.
Which also, speaking of McDonald, a particularly interesting aspect of that case would be how, at least in my mind, the gun control debate is now turning back onto the Bill of Rights. That it's now apparently, at least through McDonald, beginning to influence how we interpret the Bill of Rights. Since if I recall correctly, and you be better at this than I would, that there was actually debate in the Supreme Court about the slaughterhouse cases regarding McDonald and how this might actually mean that we're going to be, I'm not sure if it's reinterpreting or newly interpreting the Bill of Rights is now applying to states and municipalities.
Right, and not to get into too complicated territory, but the idea of incorporation, what We know the Bill of Rights initially was, was created to protect individuals from infringement by the federal government. And so the question is, how far does it go to provide protections against infringements by both municipalities, local governments, and state governments? So we know the McDonald case says, yes, that the Second Amendment is something that's protected by infringement by the state. So I don't know. That's an interesting question. See how far they'll go with that. But one thing we have to understand, though, for all of the liberties that we have in the Bill of Rights, there have always been restrictions of some sort on just about every freedom that we have. So I think the position that there can be no restrictions clearly is not consistent with our constitutional history. But I think the NRA, though, has an interesting argument about these laws, and I guess this is the $64,000 question. Even if these laws are constitutional and even if they were implemented, how effective do you think they would be?
For something like the most recent shooting, I am not convinced, and that's been the biggest problem I've had in this. Not that I'm an expert in gun control legislation by any means, but I've been trying to turn over what would have been an effective law, an effective regulation that could have been in place that would have prevented the most recent school shooting. And I honestly can't think of what would work because the case is so peculiar. Sure. You have a youth who may or may not be mentally challenged, mentally ill, according to some reports, who is getting hold of guns and ammunition that he never had any legal right to possess.
Right.
So what would you do in that case? Can you have a law that prevents family members of people with various problems from owning guns? I'm not sure where we would go with that.
Yeah, and I think that may be one of the arguments that opponents of gun control would say, look, if you're willing to pass regulations, where do they stop? And again, no matter how extensively you regulate or legislate those types of things, can you really prevent someone acting in such an irrational fashion from carrying out very violent mass shootings? It's a tough thing. Like I said, it's very complex, and it's hard to imagine that what happened at Sandy Hook would have been prevented had there been some sort of more stringent gun control regulations in place. But yeah, that's a tough question.
It's a tough question, one that, for weal or woe, brings the gun control back up again, or issue up again.
Now, we did have an assault weapons ban in America from 1994 to 2004 that was not overturned by the courts. There is some debate about how effective it was because although mass shootings seemed to decline during that time period, that's not a real common event anyway, so it's very difficult to put a lot of credence in how effective or what the correlation is between that type of legislation and the absence of mass shootings because they're such a rarity. But what about background checks? It seems like the recent polling shows about 85% of Americans in favor of that type of legislation before people can purchase firearms, yet the NRA continues to even oppose that. What are your thoughts about that?
It would probably be an easier argument to make one way or the other if it were enforced evenly. If I recall correctly, to buy a gun by mail order, which can be done apparently, I've never tried, but who knows, maybe Amazon has a new section. You don't need a background check. You can simply purchase a gun and get it, in which case all the legislation on the background checks is meaningless. How far are we going to extend the background checks? Will it apply literally to every weapon or firearm that's going to be sold or purchased? Will it apply to those coming in from outside the country?
Yeah.
I really haven't heard what's going on with that, what they would do in those cases.
Right. And again, there seems to be a lot of popular support for that. Of the three things that have been proposed, I think that would be the least controversial. I have an idea about why the NRA may be opposed to that, despite polls that show, I think, 3/4 of their members actually favor background checks.
What will that be?
Well, here's my theory, okay? You know, the NRA has positioned itself as sort of the defender of Second Amendment rights, but there's also something that is clear. Whenever the NRA screams foul about gun control legislation or focus on the fact that we may be going down the road to more restrictive measures pertaining to the Second Amendment, there's a correlation to gun sales. The more fear of restrictions, gun sales increase dramatically, and the NRA receives a lot of money from gun manufacturers. And I think should they take an approach that, hey, we're willing to try a few things but not everything, that seems perhaps too reasonable, and I don't think that would spur the types of sales that we've seen in response to discussion about gun control that there have been in the last few months.
Let me ask you a question, and
Okay.
this is slightly tangential, but it really does come in because when we discuss gun control, it's always banning guns or background checks or certain types of guns get banned. What would you think would be the public reaction if, and I understand this is not necessarily a major subject at the moment, the NRA went sort of back to its roots? Since when the NRA was founded after the Civil War, one of its main reasons for existence was when the founders realized many Civil War soldiers couldn't shoot straight. They were given these guns in the war and they were shooting trees or the dirt or something. So the NRA really, in its inception, was teaching people how to use these weapons responsibly.
Right.
Do you think in the gun control debate there's any room for the NRA to become, or to push for some sort of education on how to use these weapons?
Well, I think they've been pretty vocal about their willingness to do that, especially with one of the responses to what happened at Sandy Hook. How do we prevent violence in the schools? One of the alternatives was, let's put armed people in schools, not just law enforcement officials, but also maybe even having teachers be armed, so that if you had an intruder like happened at Sandy Hook, then you would have, you know, the good guys with weapons as well. Not sure how creating basically a showdown in schools necessarily will be safer for children by any circumstance. But one thing that the NRA and other organizations have said, look, we're willing to train individuals how to use these firearms, so that in those circumstances they might be willing to protect students and to prevent someone from being able to carry out something like happened in Sandy Hook without resistance. But so, I mean, I think they would say that that's still one of their
Do you think there'd be much public support for something like that?
As far as arming teachers and so on?
As a faculty member, I'm not sure I want other faculty members armed, at least not in faculty meetings.
Yes.
But, yeah.
I think probably most folks would be more comfortable with the idea of a larger presence of law enforcement in schools, whether it be on community college campuses or in elementary schools, as opposed to teachers pulling weapons out and trying to take down someone like that. Because again, I'm not sure creating a shootout in schools is going to make schools any safer than what we already have right now, with the relatively rare occurrence, just the tragic breadth of what happens with something like Sandy Hook that's so problematic.
Yeah, and an incident like that we still don't really understand.
Right.
What was the motive? Was there a rational motive or a semi-rational motive even behind it?
And we haven't touched on one issue that certainly played a role in what happened in Sandy Hook, and that is the fact that we have, again, mental health issues related to the perpetrator. Is there really any way to effectively address all the potential root causes for this type of shooting?
That's one thing I'm not convinced of. However, it does definitely point out, one, if the reports are accurate, and this is assuming that the media is doing its job and whatnot, it sounds like there should have been more intervention in this particular individual earlier, but it didn't happen. So maybe it's not so much a matter of what could have been done to prevent him from getting weapons, so much as what could have been done to diagnose what was going on, to take him, for lack of a better term, out of society so that this wasn't even a possibility.
Right.
That we don't do very well at all.
And I think that probably brings up some more difficult questions related to the rights of individuals who deal with mental health issues. Not everyone who has mental health issues
Is going to shoot a school.
Right, is going to go out and shoot up children in a school. Although, again, we think back to what happened at Virginia Tech, there have been signs of trouble with the perpetrator there. So this is a really complex issue with that stems from a just terrible tragedy there at Sandy Hook, but one that I don't think there are any easy answers for.
I don't think there are any easy answers, and in some ways, the gun control argument is almost an excuse to avoid going into the deeper issues. Gun control is easy, I think. You're for the gun or you're against the gun.
Right.
When you get into civil rights with the mentally ill, what are the powers of the state regarding intervention in a person's life before, not necessarily they shoot someone, but the mental illness destroys their own quality of life?
Sure.
Those are the questions we tend to not want to get into.
Yeah. Well, I don't think we've solved the issue today.
Nah, not even close, no.
But we did want to talk a little bit about the different sides of the argument that stem from what happened at Sandy Hook. Thank you for being with us today on Reasonable Discourse, and we'll see you around next time.
Good evening.